Good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, speakers. I would warmly want to welcome you in the Sismanoglio Megar of the Greek Consulate General in Istanbul. Tonight it is the inaugural session of the third session of lectures, which in the past 2 years our consulate has been organizing in cooperation with the National Hellenic Research Institute, and especially with Ms. Evangelia Balta, whom I warmly thanking for her contribution. This year we have a joint organization, the National Hellenic Research Organization, with the Orient Institute of Istanbul. I would like to welcome also Mr. Whitman, to thank him for his cooperation. This year's circle is dedicating, it's called Remembering the Ottoman Past in the Eastern Mediterranean, and has many interesting lectures. I think it's not by coincidence that tonight you are starting with diplomats and traders. We take it as a compliment, we as diplomats here and my colleagues. And I would not want to take your time more. I know that Mrs. Balta will make an introduction of our keynote speakers, distinguished speakers. We really thank you for your participation. It's really a great honor for the Consulate General to have you among us. And I would also lastly want to thank our audience, our distinguished audience. It is an audience who is following very closely these lectures, and it's an audience mostly comprised by our Turkish friends and some other Greek friends, which we really welcome here. We think that also this participation is also a token of the friendship between Greece and Turkey, and in the interest you have in the cultural and other activities of this consulate. So again, thank you very much, and I give the floor to Ms. Evangelia Balta. Thank you. Sorry. Excuse me. Whitman, εντάξει, ό,τι πείτε.
Dear Mr. Kunaralp, dear Evangelia Balta, dear guests, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. After the flattering words of the Consul General, it is a great honor for me to welcome you also on behalf of the Orient Institute Istanbul as one of the organizing co-sponsoring institutions of the lecture series Remembering the Ottoman Past in the Eastern Mediterranean. Before us, beginning tonight, lies a year-long fascinating promenade through the successor states of the Ottoman Empire around the Eastern Mediterranean, which in a sequence of 8 evenings with a total of 16 lectures will take us back to a rich and shared Ottoman past. A rich and shared Ottoman past which has left its lasting marks and traces up to this day through a number of different genres, testimonies and forms of cultural expression. There could be hardly a more fitting place, I believe, for such a reflection on the recollection of a shared Ottoman past than this beautiful 19th century mention of the Ottoman Rum family of the Sismanoglios. As members of the Ottoman Bankers Committee, they donated great portions of their wealth to the building of a very fine educational institution of the late Ottoman period, the Fener Rum Erkek Lisesi. Could there be an architectural manifestation that shows more convincingly the fact that the Rum of Istanbul formed an integral part of the rich cultural conglomerate of different influences of traditions that was so typical of the Ottoman Empire and its multi-ethnic and multicultural citizenry in the capital city Istanbul, and of Ottoman culture as a whole? The lectures of this series will introduce the work of international researchers from different academic disciplines who study the rich ethnic and cultural diversity of the Eastern Mediterranean region. This area has been closely interconnected since antiquity. The lectures will discuss how the memory of an Ottoman past is portrayed in an enormously wide range of sources. In addition to drawing on the personal testimonies of the inhabitants and on local literature, our speakers will also illustrate how this memory has been expressed in popular music, film, photography, and last but not least, food. This lecture series ties into and has been developed out of an ongoing larger research area at the Orient Institute Istanbul that Professor Evangelia Balta, my fellow academic coordinator of Remembering the Ottoman Past, has been contributing to since the outset. The Istanbul Memories Project is an academic endeavor that aims at the integration of the self-narratives, such as memoirs, letters, and diaries of the residents of the Ottoman Empire into the study of the history of the Ottoman Empire. We believe there's a strong need to study this history as a shared history, rather than as a combination of mere segments of this history by looking through a national, monolingual, and single cultural lens. As a consequence of the political developments following World War I, the Ottoman Empire has been treated by a great number of historians, above all, as either an intrinsic part of a country's national history or also as a dark age worthy of being discarded within the national discourse. The personal narratives of people living in the Ottoman Empire and writing about their lives in the vernaculars of Ottoman Turkish, Arabic, Greek, Bulgarian, Ladino, Armenian, etc., allows us to get closer to how this multi-ethnic empire that has had a longer life than most national states up to this day functioned, and how its population viewed their role and possibilities for participation within this entity. Such a research project only holds promise as a joint international effort between scholars of different fields and disciplines who work on sources in their respective languages. That is why the project's success relies on academic partners in Turkey and abroad. Please allow me to step back for a second and have a look at how it all started. In 2010, an international conference was organized here in Istanbul by the Orient Institute and the Institute of Turkology at the University of Bamberg in Germany. The conference, Istanbul Kuşta Constantinople, Diversity of Identities and Personal Narratives in the Ottoman Capital, 1830 to 1900, brought together speakers from almost a dozen countries who introduced self-narratives of various kinds, letters, travelogues, diaries, memoirs, in about the same number of languages. The interest in this conference was very impressive, and Professor Herzog from Bamberg and I, as the conveners of the conference, saw a strong need to develop research on Ottoman self-narratives in several of the languages in use at the time into a wider research project. Next, we organized a set of workshops with renowned academic partner institutions, to which we invited experts on self-narratives in a particular language or group of languages in order to find out where we stand and what needs to be studied next. A workshop co-organized with Professor Nathalie Claire of Setobak in Paris on the Ottoman Imperial Center and Personal Memoirs written in the languages of the Balkans was held in 2012. In the same year, we had a workshop with Professor Evangelia Balta of the Program of Ottoman Studies at the Hellenic Research Foundation in Athens, which brought together about a dozen Greek-speaking scholars. In cooperation with several partners in Israel, we organized and co-organized by Professor Yaron Ben-Nai, we held a workshop at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem focusing on personal memoirs of Jews with regard to the Ottoman Empire. A workshop on Armenian self-narratives on the Ottoman Empire was held at the University of Bamberg in Germany. Last but not least, we had a workshop on Polish self-narratives in conjunction with the 600th anniversary of Polish-Ottoman relations. Over the past 3 years, the Orient Institute has given out about a dozen stipends to PhD students from around the world working on self-narratives in the various languages. Next year, we will have an Italian-French postdoc scholar with us who will study self-narratives produced by Istanbul's sizable community of Levantines who wrote in French and Italian. In order to make this research known and accessible to the wider academic community, 2 new publication series have been founded. With Ashgate in London, a new series called Self-Narratives of the Ottoman Realm, Individual and Empire in the Near East, will provide a platform for publishing conference proceedings such as the Istanbul Kuşta Constantinople Conference, due to appear in 2016. Thematic volumes such as a handbook on the state of self-narrative research on the Ottoman Empire, to which Professor Balta kindly has contributed the article on Greek Ottoman sources, as well as monographs. An international advisory board with renowned scholars including Professor Strauss from Strasbourg, Professor Kafada, Professor Eldem, Professor Claire, Professor Fortner, Ilham Makdisi, Rachel Goshgarian, and of course our dear Professor Balta, will guarantee the quality of such an academic enterprise. While developing the research area of self-narratives on the Ottoman Empire, it soon became clear that there's also demand to make accessible to an international English-speaking public smaller sources that are usually not considered in monograph series, which are kept in private possession or in hardly accessible public collections. Allow me to take this opportunity to inform you that the first volume of the new series, the Istanbul Letters of Alkan Nestorov, will soon be presented, that is on November 11 at 7 o'clock at the Orient Institute, Istanbul. You're all cordially invited to come to this event, which portrays an interesting perspective from a lady from the Balkans who accompanied her diplomat husband to Istanbul, and it provides an unusual account of everyday life in Istanbul during the Young Turk Revolution. If you put your name and email address in the list that is being passed around tonight, we will also send you an invitation to this event, as well as to the other evenings of the Remembering the Ottoman Past series. Before handing over the microphone now to my colleague, Professor Balta, for the introduction of tonight's speakers, a few words of thanks are called for. First of all, to our host for the series, the Consul General of Greece, Mr. Sekeris, and his staff, who have invited us to the Sisman Oglio Megaro. Without the generous financial support of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, the high-tech simultaneous translation of the lectures would not have been possible. We're deeply indebted to the Bodosaki Foundation, which makes all the lectures available online, so listeners not only here in Istanbul can benefit from the talks. The Max Weber Foundation, which funds the Orient Institute Istanbul, and its director, Professor Raul Motika, also deserve our thanks for their support. It has been the extremely productive cooperation with Professor Balta that has made all of this possible, and I would like to thank her at this occasion. Welcome to tonight's speakers, Professor Hatziano and Sinan Kunaalp. I wish us all a fascinating evening on the recollections of diplomats and traders.
Dear friends, I would also in turn like to welcome you to the first seance of this year's lectures, which are dedicated to the memory of our colleague Vangelis Kechriotis, who recently passed away. A fitting tribute to Vangelis, whose academic work was devoted to the Ottoman past of the Eastern Mediterranean. Vangelis Kechriotis participated with us in workshops on the Ottoman memory of Istanbul, which we have organized in recent years. Our lectures on the Ottoman past of the Eastern Mediterranean are a memorial to his memory, a collective memorialization. May his memory be eternal. Αιωνία η μνήμη του. Vangelis will rest in our memory. As you know, there is an essential difference between memory, mnemi, mnimi in Greek, and remembrance, Anamnήσεις. The first describes the infinitive chain which never breaks. The second, the act to invoking what has been forgotten. Vangelis will rest in our memory. Today, through texts left behind by Room Ottoman diplomats and Room traders and businessmen, we shall recall and discuss the era in which these two classes of Ottoman subjects lived and worked. We shall talk about the world they lived in and experienced, which they wanted to immortalize in their memories and hand down to the next generation. I am delighted to introduce to you two old friends and good colleagues. Maria Christina Hadjioannou is a research director at the National Hellenic Research Foundation. She is an historian of modern times involved with commercial networks. She researches contacts linking to the world of producers, middlemen, businessmen, and their interaction with the political, financial, and social environment. She has devoted a number of studies to this topic. Together with Professor Alkis Engelou, she published and annotated the memoirs of Andreas Ingros, a businessman and banker who, at the end of the Crimean War, transferred his business activities to the Greek kingdom. I hope that one day we will see these memoirs translated in Turkish. Sinan Kuneralp is a researcher of the late Ottoman diplomatic history. The contribution he has made is enormous, as for many years he has been discovering and publishing unknown archival material from Ottoman and Balkan archives, shedding light on the Ottoman diplomacy from the side of East. Sinan Kuneralp has also made yet another important contribution to Ottoman and Turkish studies. In 1983, he founded the international publishing house, Isis Press, in Istanbul, where Ottomanists and Turkologists from all over the world can publish their studies. An experiment that was successful, an outstanding and prominent publishing house that is a credit to Turkey. Today, we are going to go against our principle of ladies first. This violation of etiquette is being made to honor the Greek consular authorities in Istanbul, together with whom the National Hellenic Research Foundation, for the third consecutive year, is organizing these cultural events. This year, we have as a partner and another European institution, the very well-known Orient Institute. Sinan, my friend, please take the floor. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank Evangelina for her overstated speech. I'm not sure I deserve all of the kind introductions, but still, thank you so much. Well, first of all, I would like to start with a symbolic picture. The date is September 15, 1914. The location is the Dutch capital city, The Hague. So we are in front of the Russian chapel of the Russian legation, the Orthodox place of worship. Its facade is draped with a huge Turkish flag. And the reason is the envoy of the Ottoman Sultan to the Dutch court, and he had died a couple of days earlier. So, and he's Aristaki Bey from the Ottoman rooms, and on September 1415, it was more than 4 weeks the First World War started, and Holland and the Ottoman Empire are still neutral. Therefore, in the church, there are the representatives of both sides who are ready at the church. So at that day, on that day, it's not only the ambassador of the Ottoman Empire who was buried, but it was also the end of an era. And today, on this night, I will be talking about a number of Rum origin Ottoman diplomats who played a significant role in those days. We have 4 nucleus families actually who are playing a significant role: Musurus, Aristakis, Karatoids, and Madroyenis. Well, I don't want to go into a lot of technical details, but some of you can think that in the service of the Ottoman, what were those Rum people, the Anatolian Greeks, were doing in the service of the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century, until 19th century. The Ottoman Empire had this reciprocity rule in terms of the diplomatic relationships. They have not had that reciprocity principle. There were the representatives in Constantinople, in Istanbul, the representatives of the European countries. However, this was not the same situation in the Ottoman Empire. For the Ottoman Empire, there were only some special officials, Mehmet Çelebi Efendi, who was sent to Paris, is one of the most famous examples. And throughout the French Revolution, for a short period of time, Ottoman Empire switched to the reciprocity rule. In 4 big capitals of Europe, Ottoman Empire opened embassies, and with the turmoil which took place in French Revolution and the other accompanying situations, they were closed down. So it's not very easy to, of course, to breed diplomats. They need to feature a number of skills and a certain knowledge level. And in the Muslim section of the Ottoman Empire, until that time, there were a number of people who sort of expanded to Europe, but because of some language, because of lack of European some language skills, they mainly made use of, they consulted and resorted to the minorities in such diplomatic skills. And the most able ones among these minorities were the Anatolian Greeks and Ottoman Greeks. We all know the Fenerli Rum family in Buda and Efrak. They worked very well, and they are the single aristocratic society or community, so to say, of the Ottoman Empire. And after the embassies were opened in 1950s, there was this famous quote of Mahmud II: "For me, those who are ready to go to Europe and serve for me are much more valuable than those who fight in the real war." But among Muslims, until the time when the Muslims were actually educated in order to have those skills, the only solution were the Ottoman Greeks. Musunus family is one of the most famous of those. I won't go into the details. Musurus is a Cretan family. They come to Cretan family. They come to Istanbul. The young Konstaki in 1980s played a role in the administration and in Sisam Island. At the end of a very significant personal decision, married the daughter of Vogori Bey, who was a very significant and key person back at that time, and it was a rather popular thing in the Ottoman Empire. So, you know, this marriage opened almost all of the doors to him. He was making great use of his father-in-law's network, his connections. He was also making great use of the opportunities which were served to him, and he became the first ambassador in Athens of Ottoman Empire. 1840, he was assigned to Athens, and the relations between these two countries were quite limited. They were not very good. He spent almost 35 years, while serving in Athens for almost 10 years. He incurred the animosity of the king, of the leading local politicians, After he spent 8 years there, he was assigned to another office, then to Vienna and to the London embassy, which is one of his most famous posts, so to say, office. He served consecutively for almost 35 years there. There are many reasons. There are two reasons actually why he stayed that long. The first reason is the British Queen Victoria had sort of a conservative attitude. Because in her opinion, she was not wishing a Muslim representative. That's how he was able to serve around 35 years. Musurus served 35 years in London, but that's not the only reason, of course. His insights, his intuition, his experience, which he was able to gather, and both the emperor in Istanbul and the Sadrazams and the other representatives of the business community were the reasons and supported him to stay in that office, stay in that position. And the other families, Aristakis and Karaturtis, we have two Aristarki. Even though Musurus representing the rather new community, whereas Aristarki belongs to an old Fener community. The grandfather of Aristarki family, who is an Ottoman Greek, is one of the last non-Muslim interpreters or translators of the Sublime Porte, and he was beheaded because of some rumors that he betrayed, but the sons and the grandchildren played significant role and had very significant positions in the Ottoman Empire, which is an indicator of the Ottoman pragmatism as well as the tolerance as well. They knew very well how to make use of the people who are showing a certain set of skills, abilities, and strength. So, Aristarki family, as I told you before, they're two, one uncle and one niece. One of them worked as an embassy in Berlin, the other one in Washington. And the third family, Karatodiri, Alexander Karatodiri is the most famous Ottoman Greek diplomat because of his position, his office in Berlin. And his diplomatic career was rather limited for quite long years. He worked in the Ottoman service in Istanbul. He served for a couple of years as Ottoman minister in Rome, and in Istanbul as a minister of briefly as undersecretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And but there is this enduring legend or name, and we have urban legends, many urban legends in the Ottoman Empire, and one of these urban legends is that he was sent to Berlin because he was a Christian, and in Berlin it was already known that there's not going to be a positive situation, so that the Berlin conference is not going to be positively ended, so that we shouldn't be sending a Muslim for that would become a notorious person, so that we should send a Christian person to bear the onus in this respect. But Sadrazam Sadık Pasha, who is Muslim, was going to be the representative. But Sultan Abdülhamit and Sadrazam Sadık Pasha had some deteriorating relations because of a number of reasons. While just about Sadık Pasha was about to embark on the boat, he was taken back, and Karadotori was sent to Berlin. So Etienne Karadotori, who's the niece, his nephew, who worked at Brussels for quite long years, and he is famous for a number of things, as well as his ambassador identity. He is the father of Constantin Karatodori, one of the greatest mathematicians of the 20th century. Very few people are actually aware of the fact that Constantine had been born a citizen of the Turkish Empire, and if things ended differently, Constantin Karatodori perhaps, rather than being the head of the mathematicians, the mathematics department at Berlin University, he might have ended up in Istanbul in any university, and the whole history of science could have been written altogether different. The third family is Madrogeni family, Mavroyeni, and they are another Phaneroid family, and he served in Washington for quite a long time, and he was also the ambassador to Vienna. So now that I have just drawn the portraits, I just would like to touch upon some other periphery subjects. So there are two identities of these people. They were Orthodox, they were Christians, Orthodox, they were Ottoman Greeks, and they were Ottoman. First, well, of course, based on the situation, these identities would take different orders. Sometimes they were Ottoman Greek in the first place, followed by Ottoman identity, Orthodox and Christian, so on and so forth.
İki tane büyük kara sabanları var.
There are two major, actually, common points of these families. They were very much terrified of the Russian threat. When we look at their formal correspondence or the correspondences or letters within the family, we see that, the nemesis, the main nemesis, is the Russians. So it's not only, they write about these subjects because they would like to show, look good to the Ottoman Empire. So we see the same theme which was touched upon by them in the family letters as well, family correspondences as well. The second major
menfi bir bakıştan bir gözden baktıkları ülke
and rather negative country for them is Greece. It might be because they would like to look good to Istanbul as well, so that they will be favored by Istanbul. But it might be also the case that, the Turkish people or the Ottoman people have this tendency to treat negatively the Ottoman Greek people. And actually in Athens, Photiandes, one of the ambassadors in Athens, who is one of the nemesis of the Russians, he stayed for 6 years in Athens, and then he prepared a report and sent to Istanbul saying that, now that I live in this country, I am convinced that I live in an asylum. When I told this to any Greek friend of mine, Karamadis told me the same thing. And with respect to this Christianity Orthodox identity, there are different and very interesting attitudes, especially in terms of the balance in the Balkan region. The Slavic people are the real enemies, so to say. In order to strike a balance in the Balkan region, there was this always a proposed collaboration with the Vatican, especially the Catholics in the Bosnia should be supported according to their opinions, and Vatican and Austria should strengthen their power on the Catholics. This is what they propose, and this is actually which is rather conflicting an orthodox point of view. However, in the world of or the geography of Ottoman Empire, and in this respective balance, this could be legitimized, or this could be established. Unfortunately, that was not implemented per se. Within the service of Ottoman Empire, well, this is one of the subjects which I touch upon. Then, why were they accepted into service of Ottoman Empire, or why did they continue to serve in the Ottoman Empire? Aristaki in Berlin, Aristaki Bey, when you look at one of his diaries, he mentions, there's a quotation from his letter to his acquaintance who was trained for many long years in Germany, decided to come back to Istanbul. And he says that Istanbul is my hometown. This is my native land. And if Ottoman Empire cares about us, they can demand anything from us. We can devote everything our everything to the state. So these are two Ottoman Greeks writing to one another. These are Rum people, the Anatolian, and this is not public correspondence. These are, actually indicators of a very interesting mentality, so to say. Likewise, the Turkish-Russian War which was about to end in defeat. The Musul Pasha and his daughters were writing letters to one another, and when we look at those correspondences, we see that there are concerns, there are unhappy emotions, and there's unhappiness and sadness, which could be very anecdotal, but to a certain extent, they are indicators, they are the representations of the reality in another realm. Especially, this is a very popular expression these days, the Ottomanism, so to say. This is a rather popular thing. Maybe we're going to offend some people, but the real Ottomans, maybe Karateodoros to a certain extent, is Karateodoros Musurus, Mavroionis, or the Ottomans. Maybe it's going to be a rather polemic creating, but and upon this, I would like to conclude my disconnected remarks, and I would like to leave the floor to Maria Cristina, who would be preparing a very scientific paper here. The floor is yours. Sinan, çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Maria Cristina, buyurun efendim, söz sizin.
Thank you. I would like to thank you warmly for your presence here. I would like to thank for the invitation and the hospitality the Greek Consulate in Istanbul, Mr. Sekeris, the Orient Institute, Dr. Wittmann, and my dear colleague from the National Hellenic Research Foundation, Evangelia Balta. Now, testimonies of the Ottoman Empire. The importance of Ottoman legacy for shaping the Greek Ottoman entrepreneurs is evident. However, the Ottomans' memory was subject to different interpretations and perceptions. In this lecture, the main issue is the Ottoman past as shaped in merchants' history and memory through private sources, that is, commercial archives and memoirs. Andreas Sigros, we have heard about him, was born in Istanbul in 1830, died in Athens in 1899. He is one of the most brilliant and renowned representatives of the group of the Greek origin Galata bankers, who transferred his activities and his residence in the Greek state in the 1870s. His unique position as a businessman is reflected in his personal discourse and the public controversy surrounding his entrepreneurial behavior. His personality and actions can be studied mainly through two autobiographical texts, his will and his memoirs. Consistent with the characteristic phrase he wrote in his memoirs, "I'm drunk at work." He was a workaholic. Andreas Sigros' quest for entrepreneurial opportunities in the Ottoman Empire and the Greek state spanned some 50 years. Sigros took up residence in Athens in 1872 and became active in what he knew best, finance. Although he started out as an apprentice accountant and then as a partner in Greek commercial networks in Istanbul, he soon founded a financial brokerage house. Thus, before becoming established in Athens, he was well experienced in the stock exchanges of London and Paris and the foreign bonds of the Ottoman public debt. The real date of Sigros' memories from Istanbul begin in 1845, when he returns there as a 15-year-old boy, bewildered from the big capital, as he describes it in his memoirs, published after his death. He goes in the area of Kursunlu Han in order to work there as an apprentice. It's very interesting to know the length of the various instances that he gives, a consistent element of everyday life. For instance, he describes his route on foot from Persebe Pazari to Valide Han as a long, tiring excursion through cobblestone roads in order to arrive to Ticharet Han, where the office of the merchant Nikolos Damianos was located. This merchant house was importing manufactures, British cloth, and exporting silk. So Sigros' daily routes from Valide Han area to Pera were engaging at least 1 hour, since he had to take a boat every time he wanted to cross the Golden Horn, paying half gurus, and travel stuck with many other passengers under diverse weather conditions. Sigros' topography of Istanbul is full of information about social and economic life there and constitutes an interesting subject per se. I'll switch now to evidence from Ottoman-based Greek merchant houses. The two case studies, the 19th century Yerousi merchant house and the 19th century Raleigh merchant house. The Yerousi merchant house is an example of a family network that came into being in Izmir and Trieste at the beginning of the 19th century. Subsequently expanded to the Aegean port of Syros and finally moved to the Peloponnesian export port for currants, Patras, and then to London. Its trade capital consisted of liquid assets, a network of personal relationships, and the essential know-how that had been acquired through international transactions in Izmir and Trieste. On this basis, the three Yerousi brothers established their family network during the years 1823-1835. They exported agricultural raw commodities, Wallonia, raisins, silk, sponges, cotton, and imported colonial goods and manufactures, coffee, sugar, lumber boards, nails, paper, ropes, and cloth, between Izmir and Trieste. In the second phase of the family network, they diversified their activities to take advantage of the Greek export boom of currants from Patras to England. The Yerousi house can be classified as a family network of medium-sized merchants who were active in the early 19th century in the maritime trade of Eastern Mediterranean. Its activities place it amongst the merchants who extended the limits of local trade within the Ottoman Empire and became involved in international transactions through the security of the family network and the Greek communities in the port cities of Ottoman Izmir, the multi-ethnic Izmir, and Habsburg Trieste, a free port, in the first half of the 19th century. Their Ottoman experience was mixed and full of distrust and confidence. I'll give you two extracts from the Yerousi correspondence that reveal these sentiments. The first one comes from a correspondent from Istanbul to Emanuel Yerousis in Syros, 1835. What do you think that here, meaning Istanbul, is Syros or Greek kingdom? Even if devil himself comes down here, will not be able to do business. Here we have the customs of Turkish diplomacy and Ottoman Empire. The next extract is where their trust in the long-lived multi-ethnic market of Izmir is depicted in a letter written by one of the Gerousi brothers 2 years after the previous one, before transferring to the unknown to them Greek port of Patras in 1837. I quote, "There have been lack of opportunities in Izmir in the last years, but Izmir is an old emporium and has surpassed various misfortunes up to now, so it can still endure and revive." The Raleigh family history, playing a crucial role in the international commercial transactions during the 19th century, constitutes one of the most indicative examples of the Greek-Chian origin in the Mediterranean transactions, and especially through the relationship between Chios, Istanbul, and Genoa, that constituted a comparative advantage for some multi-branch Chian families such as the Raleigh. Trading operations was the main characteristic of their long-lasting economic activity, which was geographically organized and often redefined itself in order to respond to the changing international market demand. The 5 Raleigh brothers were born in the Ottoman Empire in the last quarter of the 18th century and dispersed in the Mediterranean trading centers from Istanbul, Malta, Livorno, and Marseille before establishing themselves in London around 1818. One of their first business acquaintances in London was the well-known Jewish banker Nathan Mayer Rothschild. The reason for this was to open a credit account with his house in the new promising market of the City of London. The circular letter bears the date London, 1st January 1819. I quote, "We beg to inform you that we have this day formed an establishment in the city under the firm Raleigh & Petrokokino." In a subsequent circular of 17 May 1819, together with Petrokokino's signature, there followed an indication of their nexus to the east. I quote, "You will see by the enclosed letter that our respective houses of Istanbul are answerable and guarantees for all transactions in our establishment in this city, in London." So it was the Istanbul-based branch that was guaranteeing for the Raleigh firm in the Rothschild Bank. Points in common that have emerged from the study of merchant houses and networks in the period from the 18th century to the late 19th century within the Ottoman Empire's trade will be introduced here based on evidence from several case studies, from British case studies like the Radcliffe business, exporting silk from the Ottoman Empire and importing manufactures and colonial goods to Istanbul in the early 18th century, from the Armenian case study, the commercial house of Adam Nourair, who extended his commercial house in wholesale trade of clothes in the late 19th century from Istanbul to Paris, Manchester, and London. They all share common characteristics with the Greek case studies, the Gerousi family network, the Raleigh family merchant house, and others. I will briefly analyze here what I call the Ottoman experience, that is, trade and social capital, and the geographical advantage, indicating the geographical advantage, familiarity and knowledge of the environment, of ports, products, and trade know-how. These previously mentioned merchants shared economic features that can be analyzed as the concept of social capital in combination with personal networks. It can be tested in my analysis that social capital in the form of close ties to family and community may produce benefits by raising effectiveness and by raising profits, by reducing the cost of transactions in business due to higher trust between the parties involved, It was a form of complex capital that was constituted by liquid assets, a network of personal relations, and the essential commercial know-how that merchant entrepreneurs had acquired in conducting local and international transactions. The family firm. The family constituted the creative cell of the enterprise and simultaneously the nutshell of its security. Family bonds covered and maintained the family name, which often functioned as self-security and as a guarantee in social and economic transactions. The family firm was an institution that weathered political and economic changes with remarkable resilience. At the same time, through the close ties of interdependence, the family firm maintained relations based on hierarchy and gender, in which sentiments of enmity, rivalry, and competition were cultivated that were not independent of economic action. The third feature is the culture of commerce. This is a complex phenomenon examining commercial knowledge that was often reproduced through tacit knowledge in trade networks and transferred in merchant culture. I would like to stress that all transactions have a personal character and that cultural values very often have local characteristics. In each trade network, the center of cultural changes was located in the urban centers, where the distribution of goods was concentrated and the most frequent migration and exchanges were observed. The moral aspects of this culture of commerce influence the economic behavior of the businessman, legitimizing special principles of behavior and dictating various engagements. For example, the ability to enter into moral engagements and to accept responsibility for these are characteristics that can convince the partner of a firm that they will not fall victim to speculation and fraud. Finally, the culture of commerce can be the basis of a long-lasting competitive advantage. In the history of the Raleigh family, this is evident. In conclusion, I would briefly stress that the predominant type of Greek merchant entrepreneur in the 18th and 19th centuries traded various import-export commodities and rarely specialized. Their role as intermediary merchants in the foreign trade of the Ottoman Empire has been well documented. The majority were merchants who depended on local products of the Mediterranean region, such as raisins in Izmir, cotton in Egypt, in order to expand their entrepreneurial activities. This group was dependent on international demand and faced a high degree of inter-ethnic and international competition. It was a large, uneven group that consisted of big, medium, and small merchants. What's the main link that joins the three Geroussi brothers to the five Raleigh brothers and many other examples? All family firms started their business in the Ottoman Empire and especially in the Eastern Mediterranean. They form part of a corpus of representative examples of commercial firms and family capitalism whose entrepreneurship was built on intermediation. Both of them, all of them, chose the role of the intermediary, reducing the probability of unsuccessful deals that arose from direct trade. Their efficiency depended on various socioeconomic and political variables, but as intermediaries, they were more competent in matching buyers and sellers. This competence was based in the Ottoman Empire as the place of origin, the place of trading, and the place of production and consumption of commodities. The Ottoman Empire was the source of their trade capital, that is, the knowledge of how to trade goods on the international market, as well as the formation of their social capital, which was a unique competitive advantage for their expansion as commercial networks. So we argue that the key factors in this debate, described as the Ottoman experience, as I call it, as fundamental principles widely shared or disseminated, shaping commercial networks within and beyond the Mediterranean. Thank you.
I found your remark at the beginning of the talk quite interesting, that the traffic already was an issue at the time. Getting from one place in Istanbul to another already back then could take an hour. That was quite fascinating, I thought.
I was fascinated by this remark by Sigros, because it's a different it's not the traffic only, but it's how you measure the time, really.
Right.
He was really feeling that it was a long distance from Validehan to Pera. It was a long and tiring, very tiring. It was an excursion, he was saying. It was not today it's still.
One question that came to my mind, I think I would like to pose that question to both of you speakers. To what degree were matters of loyalty expressed as an issue in the text that you covered? I mean, obviously we have different political systems right next to each other, and people who could be transient figures from one system to another.
May I start? In my case, in the case of my people at least, loyalty was not in question. The room diplomats had a sort of felt a personal link of loyalty to the Sultan, to the emperor. They were his servants in the classical sense. They felt not so much at ease in their relationships with their colleagues, their Muslim colleagues. At least in the first generations, they tended to look down on them because they felt that they had a better education, a sounder worldview. They made fun of them in the diaries, in their private letters. For instance, the father of the great man of the CUP, the Committee of Union and Progress, Ahmet Reza. His father was an early diplomat in the 1850s. And he was known to have picked up some English during the Crimean War because he had mingled with the English soldiers, and he was known as Ingiliz. And Aristarchi made fun of him because he made fun of his English, made fun of his provincialism when he came to Berlin. Same, Kemal Efendi, the Minister of National Education, who was known to have initiated the use of maps in Ottoman schools, and he was known as Haritacı Kemal Efendi, and he was the object of ridicule by his Greek room colleagues. But loyalty, they felt loyal servants of the Sultan. This was never in question.
Well, loyalty in commercial transactions is very relative, and it's another issue. What I have to say is when you trade in bona fide. That means that you must trust the other. So trust is the main thing. You may even go bankrupt, but still have this trust from your other let's say partners or merchants in the community that you have your transactions. This is very relative, and I have said it's completely different from what we understand as loyalty in diplomatic service. It's another issue. It's trade in bona fide, I would say. That's the main thing.
Well, it was a great presentation. Can you please make it much easier to understand for Istanbul lovers and the tourists? You know, where did they live in Istanbul? There is a Raleigh apartment at the back of German hospital. When you talk about commandos, for example, where did these people live in Istanbul? Their kiosks, their palaces. Did they build any church, any school? If you simply go beyond that level, you know, especially for the upcoming events, we would be very happy for the non-academics and, you know, non-experts. It would be better if you can make it less complicated. You know, the question is easy, but it's very difficult to answer. You know, if you work with history, my colleagues might touch upon that as well, who are dealing with history. In terms of Turkish historiography, it is very difficult and challenging to go into the details. The Musurus kiosk, their palace, is very famous in Arnavutköy, located in Arnavutköy, where Robert College stands now in that field, positioned over that field. Actually, it doesn't belong to Musurus, but the father-in-law of Rogorides, Stefan Rogorides, in Kuruçeşme, Arnavutköy, you know, that was where it was built, and it went through a certain number of phases. The building went through a certain number of phases. Aristakis had in Yeniköy, Karatodori in Yeniköy, but the current position, current location, I don't really know. Maybe my colleague, my friend, would be in a position to tell you that. It's very difficult to identify, as a matter of fact. Thank you. I'm sorry, this is inaudible to the interpreter. I'm not an historian. I just happen to know. I have worked on Karatodis. You know, they have a palace which was burned down in Kuruçeşme in 1919. We actually have the pictures, but there are various opinions of the newer place. There are pictures while it was burning down. I think it was leased to the French people. There is also, again, Karatodis have an existing palace in Yeniköy, which was sold in 1950s. And mathematician Konstantin Karatodoris, sold it. However, Alexander, it didn't belong to them, but you know, the brother Antonion Karatodoris family, and it is still available. It is existing. The one in Kuruçeşme, it's not Karatodori. Karatodori married Musurus, so it was a dowry of Musurus. Might be, but the name is registered as such in the title, in their name. Musurus are buried in Arnavutköy. I'm sorry, I can't hear. That one is in Balat, which is known as the Iron Church, Demir Kilise, Stefanos. In Balat, Fener. The Svetis, yes. Musurus are buried there. Karatodor'un funerals took place in Taksiyersiz and Musurus in Arnavutköy, and the remaining two are in Yeniköy. In this Karatodori family, the ones who are residing in Yeniköy, I met a lady who was residing in Yeniköy, and there is still a family member who belongs to their family. Anna Vigleri, yes. And on the male side, patriarchal side, as I've told you before, of those four families, they have been all dead now. They have passed away. The Musurus, there is no male family member of Musurus family. They have all passed on. Karatodori likewise. So that is the situation. We have the
Mr. Kunal, I presume from your remarks that the majority of minority diplomats were of Greek origin. I wonder whether there were others as well, like Armenian, and I remember that at least at the Berlin Congress there was one of German origin sent as well.
Yes,
and Bismarck was not amused by it, frankly speaking.
Yes, but he was not a diplomat. He was
he was an admiral, when I'm not mistaken.
He was an army general, Mehmet Ali Pasha from Detroit, but he was not a diplomat. He was the second plenipotentiary at the Congress. But there's a handful of Armenians who were heads of diplomatic missions. A few Jews, but they never became head of diplomatic missions. There were a few, some oddities, a few oddities, if you allow me the term. There's a Belgian who started his career as the Belgian chargé d'affaires in Istanbul and Constantinople, switched sides and became the Turkish chargé d'affaires in Brussels. There is an Italian, Rustem, who served as ambassador in Italy and London. So the whole spectrum actually is represented in the diplomatic service.
Let me just remark, this was the custom 100 years earlier in European countries as well.
Absolutely.
We were asked as experts, not as nationals of certain countries.
Absolutely. The Russian diplomatic service is composed by half of the Russian diplomatic service is German. Is German, yes, absolutely. But also.
Subjects of Russian Empire and
absolutely, but and the Swiss also. Jomini was Swiss.
We talk about Nesselrode because the Russians, they cannot stand anyone who has a pure origin. For example, Nesselrode used to keep speaking German at home or French, and the Russians called him, as he was also a partner of Metternich, that was the policy of that time. The Russians called him Австрийский министр российских иностранных дел, Austrian Minister of Russian Foreign Affairs. That's very interesting, but seems to be, I mean, they had been, unlike Ottomans, maybe much more nationalist in this matter. because we have a lot of political Germans, not only in foreign office, even in the army. And I would say the war of Plevna and others in 77 is a product of German origin engineers, I mean, because of, like, I mean, Tottleben, etc., general.
About the Lambsdorffs.
Pardon?
The Lambsdorffs, still a very famous family in Germany.
Of course.
Yeah. No, it was one of the most famous German origin families was the von Lambsdorffs. They are still in German politics today, a very important family.
Yes, to change the subject a little bit, first of all, thank you both for coming. Both your lectures have been terrific. My question is a little bit more towards Ms. Chatsiono's field. To what extent were these minority financiers and commercial endeavors able to securitize their wealth? Did they invest in property? Could they establish waqf? How did they move their money? Was there any risk of seizure by the Sultan? If you could comment a little bit on that, thank you.
I happen to know what's happening with Sigros and Camondo, for instance. I will talk about Camondo, that you know very well. Camondo has extensive estates here in Istanbul. He had very big, he owned a big land estates, but the Sigros didn't have. It's strange that the Greeks that I know through Sigros memoirs didn't have estates here. I mean, they didn't have any property because they didn't care about property. It was not the land that they were interested. It was only the finance. So they could secure that they would take the bonds, they would deal, they would borrow money, they would lend money to the state. That was their only feature that they had in their only intention that they had in their mind. In Izmir, though, after 1860s, they wanted to have land, some land at least. And I know I've tried to reconstruct some stories that it was so difficult then to inherit your property. Because you had the member of the family living in Marseille, and the other in Athens, and the third was left in Izmir. So who would take up the property? That was a big issue. At the end, I don't know what happened, really. Because also they didn't have VAX, but in Izmir, for instance, they would donate the estate, their houses, to Evangeliki Scholi. So then the brother from Marseille would say, why? This is not fair, and I don't recognize this donation. What I would like to say here, it's what we really understand as family unity. It's not evident and it's not true at all. These family firms really worked as family firms in order to transfer their capitals, transfer goods, have transactions, make other dependent firms in each place where they were established. But there was no unanimously will about what to do, how to share the properties, the funds, where to go. I know, for instance, when they decided to transfer in Patras, this brother from Izmir was really in pain. That's why I read you this extract. And it's very important to see, apart from economic transactions, history of sentiments, what I try to recognize lately in my work. History of sentiments, because there are sentiments before all these dealings.
Biraz karışık bir soru olabilir. Might be a rather complicated question. I would like to ask this question to you about Musurus Pasha. Can we call him Pasha? Yes. The first non-Muslim Pasha, actually. Okay. For quite a number of years, I have this question about this loyalty and being servant to the emperor, to Sultan. And your remark triggered that again. It brought me back to something I read. In 1920s, I read a publication on the way to independence and sovereignty, which was talking about the outbreak of the war. And, in the publication, we see talks about Musurus Pasha in London, the diplomatic relations, all throughout the diplomatic relations. There is this, information, there is this accusation that not informing Istanbul, and he says that, unfortunately, back at that time, Ottoman Empire was waiting for the news which would come from United Kingdom, and while waiting in anticipation, they were relying on the information capability of a room person, of an Ottoman Greek. And I think it was very much embedded in the discourse back then. And here, there's this very subtle thing which it mentions. Ignatieff, for example, tells that person, or Istanbul, we're going to send an ambassador to Russia and go and ask the Brits what they think about this. Musurus asked them, but while he was reporting to Istanbul, he said that, well, these Russians, very probably, if we send a guy over there, in terms of opening the Mediterranean and the Black Sea trade, they're going to explore Batum. So let's send one. It's going to be much better. And then there was the outbreak of war, the Crimean War. So, there was one thing that you said which was very illuminating for me. The room diplomats, you talked about especially negativity towards the Austrian people. Can you dwell on that? And in this respect, do you think these multiple identities played a major role? Not maybe in terms of tricking them or betraying them, but maybe something additional. I just want to ask you what you think about this. Well, I just mentioned an urban, many urban legends, and this is one of those urban legends as well. Musurus, prior to the war, had this attitude, had this approach. Maybe to a certain extent, reflecting Istanbul to a certain extent. However, the British, in terms of he was exaggerating the opinions of the British government, and that's how he reported back to Istanbul. Let me put it that way. And the British government, back then, the Minister of Foreign Affairs had a very deep Russian enemy, and defending Ottoman Empire against the Russians, and explicitly supporting Musurus in order to defend the Ottoman Empire, and that support transferred that support to Istanbul, back to Istanbul. Upon that, the Brits were rather afraid, because somehow we're going to be trapped in this war, we're going to be a part of this war, and as a very typical British slippery end, and they just switch. Okay, you know what? The Consul General misunderstood us. That was the defense mechanism that they triggered, and they accused Musurus. However, when we look at the personal correspondence, hang in there, we're going to be there for you. But at the very last moment, that support they were devoid of that support. I'm not. Was that a response to your question? So misinformation that you say, yes, definitely. It's one of the urban legends. I would like to thank you very much for your presentations. If I'm not mistaken, in 1837, it was difficult to do commerce in the Ottoman Empire. There were high customs, or there were difficulties in terms of the customs prior to the Balta Limanı agreement, and then later on the privileges given to the foreigners. The new opportunities were given to the foreigners. Do you have any records proving that? Have you encountered such records? And also with respect to the, because of the privileges given to the foreigners, international citizens, do you have any records about those who became non-Muslims or, who switched their identities? Thank you very much.
They became non-Muslims.
Yes.
No. Can you please repeat can you please repeat in English
Pardon, İngilizce bir daha söyler misiniz son parçası?
in English?
Tabii, hangi kısım?
In 1837, you mentioned the difficulties of doing commerce in the Ottoman Empire, and then there were the privileges and opportunities given to the foreigners, and with the reduction of the customs taxes. Are there any commerce who changed their nationalities or origins so that they would make use of those opportunities? Thank you.
Now I understood. Thank you. You have to distinguish between medium and large merchants. Medium merchants, they didn't take profit from recapitulations. They didn't get big profits from the Ottoman British, Ottoman French treaties. This is a different issue. Big merchants really got privileges and got a lot to gain, but the others had problems of financing their business. The main reason of leaving the Ottoman Empire is that you could not finance your commercial transactions. They wouldn't they wouldn't become Muslims, no. They would go to another place. The strategy in order to affront this problem was to go transfer your commercial activities in another place. You wouldn't become Muslim, no. Neither the Armenians, nor the Greek merchants, nor the Jews. Some of them, of course, I can't say, but the majority, that's inherent in the commercial transactions. You would transfer to another place. There was no way to finance your business. That's the main problem in the Ottoman Empire. If you didn't have a bank or someone to finance you, then you would, sooner or later, you had to leave.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for this excellent start of our series. We're very glad to have you here tonight.
Welcome back.
Thank you very much.